Good afternoon, Jay. How are you?
I'm good.
Good deal.
Good.
Beautiful weather.
Boy, man, we're having some good
Great
string
day.
of weather,
Great
aren't we?
day today. Beautiful. Perfect. Jay, we're in our, I guess it's our fourth session
Yeah,
in
looks
this
like it. Yeah.
series of meeting people like Jesus did.
Mm-hmm.
Today's series, calling out sin. You know, I guess Christians get criticized more for calling out sin, but there's a reason for it usually.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons we're going to see today in the Pharisees and the Sadducees that were there in Jesus' day, it's not much different than today.
No.
It's easy to point fingers at the sins of others. Based on what we see on social media, it
Golly.
appears that some people like to, well, they enjoy pointing the fingers at others, don't they?
I wonder if they'd be as brave if they didn't have social media and had to do it in person.
Oh, no,
you know.
no.
That gives them that nerve to just say whatever they want to say on that computer.
And you know, I'm not saying that people don't need to be aware of where they've sinned,
Yeah.
but a lot of times they don't need to have it pointed out. They
Yeah.
know it.
Yeah.
We can't not point it out, but there are ways where we can point it out to do what Jesus did, which was bring them to Him. And after all, if we point out sin, the whole point of it would be to get that person close to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not saved, to bring them to salvation some way. Jesus in the scriptures today, we're looking in Luke 11. He was invited to the home of a Pharisee again. And we know that the Pharisees, they wanted to discredit Jesus.
Right.
They weren't inviting him to their houses because they wanted to associate with him and be.
No.
They just didn't. But they wanted to catch him breaking some kind of their strict Jewish religious exercises or traditions. But they were highly respected in Jewish society. The Pharisees were looked at as ones that interpret the law, them and the scribes.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus would always use these occasions to bring these things to light that he wanted them to see about theirself. And he had such a unique way of doing that. Usually involved a parable of some sort. And he would bring them to a point where they had to deal with it. But the Pharisees thought that they were pretty much righteous.
Yeah.
And the problem that they had was obeying their legalistic viewpoints and laws that they had made up,
Right.
and holding others to account when they didn't hold themselves to account. And of course, that turns people off, and it's the same way today.
Yep.
But then later on in the study, we go to Jesus with a larger crowd, and usually a major sin is going to be exposed, and he more or less tells us that. So the tension between Jewish religious leaders and Jesus is ramping up. It's not dying down.
No,
The more these crowds grow, the more it's ramping up.
It seems like in this case, Phil, that Jesus maybe he's having a little bit of a bad hair day. He's had enough of the Pharisees. I think he finally, because he's been pretty nice to them in other occasions. Well, he's still nice here, but he's a little bit more straightforward with them this time than he has been in the past.
I don't know, this image that he leaves with the people of a little leaven
Yeah.
messing up a whole batch and or contaminating a whole batch of
Right.
bread,
Right.
he more or less was telling the Pharisees they were just like that. You know, that they could sure mess up things where people's understanding. We look at today, we've had how many TV preachers that have fallen by the wayside? Baker, Swaggart. We had the one great thing back in the 70s, the Jim Jones escapade, where more or less a cult.
Yep.
We learn from our mistakes, and that's one mistake that seems to keep recurring throughout time, because people don't study it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't look at it. It can feel disheartening to see people we once admired facing consequences for hidden sins. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that. Mm-hmm. Broken choices, whatever you want to call it. But it was no different back in Jesus' day. And we'll look at the religious leaders and the patterns that they had in their behavior. And we'll look at Jesus' response to each and every one. And always, Jesus would point out sin or point out behaviors that were wrong, and it was to bring them to Him.
Yeah, it wasn't to belittle
It wasn't to
them,
condemn
turn
them
them
or
around.
belittle them.
Yeah.
Right. It was to bring them to Him. Let's look at the passages.
Yeah, we're in
that
Luke
today.
chapter 11, verses 37 to 41 to start with. It says he was speaking, this is Jesus. He was a crowd of people, obviously, around again, like there always is. A Pharisee asked him to come to dine with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. When the Pharisee saw this, he was amazed that he did not first perform the ritual washing before dinner. But the Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and evil. Fools, didn't he who made the outside make the inside too? But give from what is within to the poor, and then everything is clean for you. But give from what is within to the poor, and then everything is clean for you." Jesus has, once again, as you said, been asked to go in and dine with the Pharisee, and he takes that opportunity. Now we know that this wasn't, as you said, this wasn't intended for fellowship, but this was another opportunity for the Pharisees to try to catch Jesus in something he says or something he does wrong that breaks their laws, not the laws of God most of the time, but their laws. And so he's trying to catch them, the Pharisee is. And it sounds like to me in this one that Jesus has finally said, "Okay, enough's enough. I'm gonna go breathe straight and to the point this time. There's not gonna be any parables. There's not gonna be anything like it. I'm gonna tell you exactly how it is." So the Pharisee saw that when Jesus came in, he didn't pause and go through the ceremonial washings that the Pharisees had established. It wasn't anything that was written in the Old Testament. It was something they came up with. They devised an elaborate system of washings that include washing before meals. The Old Testament didn't call for these washings. They had no connection to hygiene. They were a ceremonial attempt to achieve holiness in the face of the world's corruptions. We're gonna wipe all this stuff off our hands because the world is corrupt, is what the Pharisees were saying. The Pharisees were all about an outward show, but Jesus ignored all that. He just went in, sat down at the table, and started eating. Luke doesn't, in these verses, Luke doesn't record any criticism from the Pharisee. We don't see here that the Pharisee said anything, but like we noticed last week, he didn't have to say anything. Jesus knew exactly what he was thinking. And Jesus goes from sitting down to eating, and the Pharisee kind of looking, why didn't he wash his hands without saying anything? Jesus then comes back and says, "Now you Pharisees, you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are full of greed and evil. Jesus knew exactly what the Pharisee was thinking. He said, why, you clean the outside, but you're full on the inside. In other words, your heart's full. Your outward appearance is different, but your heart is full of greed and evil. Now, greed was, Jesus was highlighting two areas here. First one was greed, and the Pharisees were lovers of money. That was part of the problem, Phil, that they disliked Jesus so much, was because they were making money in their position as a Pharisee, because they were in charge of the synagogue, and they were probably involved in selling of sacrifice animals and so forth and so on. And so if their position was done away with or lessened, they were going to be hurting financially wise.
That was one of the things in the demise in Passover week when Jesus was crucified.
Yep.
Turning the tables over in the temple.
The money changers
and
there.
got in their pocketbook, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he says you're full of greed. Then he says also that you're full of evil. Now, the word for evil, I think it's the Greek word for evil, is porneia, which is our word for pornography. Mm-hmm. We know what we think of when we think of pornography. We think that's probably as evil as you can be, is if you're involved in that. And that's what Jesus said about them. They were involved in evilness in their hearts. Sometimes we can hide greed on the outside, and we can hide evil thoughts on the outside, not show them, but God knows them. And our heart cannot be made right with God if we have evil and greed in our hearts on the inside. And that's what Jesus is saying. You take care of your outside, but your inside is full of evil and greed. And he called them fools. He said, you fools. Now, we have a different meaning for fools today, I think, than they did back then. Back then, I'll see if I can find this so I can tell you exactly what it said. That the term refers to those who are blind to God. Don't recognize that there is a God. We think of fools as being someone that's not smart or someone just acts crazy and things like that. But theirs was their relationship with God. If you didn't have a relationship with God, didn't believe in God, you were considered a fool. Mm-hmm. So Jesus saying, you don't even act like there's a God. But here you are, the leaders of the religions in the country. He
JR,
said,
as a guest in this man's house, let's look at them two sentences there. How do you think the host was feeling?
I think he was. So what have I done, or what?
He done been told he's full of greed and evil, and then been called a fool.
Called a fool.
Imagine he's feeling too good now.
I bet he wishes he hadn't invited Jesus to the party. What do you say?
Probably not.
Because really, honestly, the lessons we've had before this, when Jesus confronted the Pharisees, he wasn't as straightforward. Hasn't been. He's told parables. Mm-hmm. This is something that happened in life. And he asked the Pharisee, what would you have done, or what should you do? And the Pharisee gave a right answer. But he didn't come right out and say you're full of evil and greed and you're a fool. But so I think he was probably turning a little bit red. He's probably a little bit upset that, first off, that he invited Jesus. Second, that Jesus would say something to him like he did. He didn't expect that.
Yeah.
But he says, God who made the outside also made the inside. The God who made you made your outside and your inside. God is concerned with both our outside behavior, which we know that, but he's also concerned with our inward attitude. And as Jesus said in Matthew, the inner person is the source of all outward actions. Yeah. We can't, if we have love in our heart, we'll show love. If we have hate in our heart, we'll eventually show that hate in our actions. And that's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 15. And that's what he's saying here. You can't be one thing on the inside and show have different behavior on out. It's eventually going to come out, and we'll see that in the next verse. I think of the ones you look at. He says, but give from what is within to the poor. He wanted them to change their attitude, change their lifestyle, change their heart. And when you do that, then a transformation will take place, and you will be changed from someone who God can't use to someone God can use. Your heart will be changed. Jesus called out a Pharisee for being more concerned with religious rituals than the condition of his heart. Today's society, we should have live a life, and they should have then that reflects God's love from the inside out. We shouldn't just keep up appearances, because at some point in time, as we're going to learn later, whatever's in our heart's going to come out.
Yeah.
So Jesus jumps on the Pharisee and says, I'm sure the Pharisee didn't want to hear this. And we don't hear much else from the Pharisee, but we hear from some other people that were there that didn't like it either.
When have we experienced focus on the outward appearance rather than the more important matters that they feel in the heart?
Well, you was talking about the internet, the social media.
Uh-huh.
I think you see a lot in that. You see,
I think politics is just a
Oh,
blood
it's-
sport.
yeah,
And people that run for office, you would think that they were in line for heaven's first seat.
yeah.
You know, they're so good when they
Yeah.
run, and then
They
when
get,
they get in, true colors come out
Yep.
sometimes.
it sure does. Sure does.
And that's kind of the way this thing is here.
Yep.
One thing that he said there, he said, then everything is clean for you. He's worried about Jesus washing his hands.
Yeah.
And you know, Jesus is telling him, you need to clean up your insides.
Inside, your hands are fine. You're not going to worry about your hands, but your insides are worse.
In this next passage, we start a series of woes.
Yeah.
And woe being an expression of grief, condemnation, or lament that Jesus used to call people out. He did it repetitively.
Yeah.
Denounced the Pharisees and the scribes, even the Sadducees with this. You could say that it eventually got him killed, but it wasn't the only thing. This instance here, you know, had a big impact. Do you think he turned this Pharisee into a fan with the way that he?
No.
No.
I think he said, I'll never invite this dude back.
Look here, he says, but woe to you, Pharisees! You give a tenth of mint, rue, and every kind of herb, and you bypass justice and love for God. These things you should have done without neglecting the others. Woe to you, Pharisees! You love the front seat in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace. Woe to you! You are like unmarked graves. The people who walk over them don't know it. One of the experts in the law answered him, Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us too. Then he said, woe also to you experts in the law. You load people with burdens that are hard to carry, and yet you yourselves don't touch these burdens with one of your fingers. Meaning, you don't do what you command others to do.
Right.
This woe is really it's one of the chief insults they could hear, because it is an expression of condemnation where it's concerning God and it's concerning their behavior. He calls them out on giving a tenth.
Yeah.
Now they were pious and they would give a tenth, and they made everybody that was around, you know, they'd drop down in the cup and make their change, their coins rattle around real good. they also would call out, I'm helping so-and-so down the street here who is helping his widowed sister.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give however many denarii. That was common for them. And he calls them out for giving a tenth, but leaving the important things, which was the matters of the heart, alone.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't addressing them at all. And then he talked about another thing that they did. Said, you love the front seat in the synagogues. They were afforded, as a Pharisee, they were afforded prime seating.
Right.
They were, he talked about the marketplace. When they go to the marketplace, they wore garb. They were adorned with clothing that identified them as a Pharisee.
Probably had
And
some kind of hat on.
the people would come up and
Bow to him.
bow out of respect, and they loved being recognized that way. But here he talks about you love the front seat in synagogues and your greetings in the marketplace. Woe to you! You're like unmarked graves. People walk over you, and they don't even know you're there. They don't know your real heart.
Yeah.
But I do. You know, Jesus is saying, you lose justice. And the Pharisees also, where their tithe was concerned, they would tithe every little thing. He talks about mint.
Yeah.
Even the herbs out of their garden, if they were to sell some of those, say at the temple or somewhere, well, they would take that tenth and carve it out, and they would put that in a plate and make her loud when they dropped it in there. Yeah. He talks about them being like the unmarked graves. And one of the experts of the law said, you're insulting us. Do you think Jesus didn't know that?
You know, he knew it. But then he made it, well, he wanted to make it clear they knew he was talking about them too when he said that.
When we approach someone with sin in their life, and they're living in it and enjoying it, and we pull them aside and we say something about it.
Uh-huh.
John Doe, look, you might be enjoying this affair that you're having with this lady over here, but you're destroying your family.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he's going to be offended? This
think
day and time?
I think some people would, yeah.
He's going to be offended.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't point it out to him. But how we do that, in this instance, Jesus is calling this behavior out in front of a pretty large crowd by now.
Yeah.
As he is probably upset the dinner table already. As he is sitting there and talking about these things, you know, calling them an unmarked grave and people walking over you, and you know, you insult us too, Jesus.
At first, when I read that verse, Phil, I thought when it talked about the unmarked graves that they didn't have any influence. They were just like nobody knew they were there. But in reality, with the way the teacher talks about it, if you stepped on an unmarked grave, you were unclean because anybody touched anybody unclean was touched anybody that was unclean. So they were. They were like a dead person.
Yeah.
That made everybody unclean. Their actions caused them to influence. They had such an influence on people. That's why he said that you're like a unmarked grave. You're out there in the open and but you're hindering people. You're hurting people. You're making people unclean every day by your actions.
They believed in this uncleanliness so much that they would paint those stones, whitewash them.
Yeah.
Even if they were a white stone, they would whitewash them so that they were always marked in some way. And
they had such an impact on people that they didn't know it, I guess, because they were doing bad things, but they thought they were good,
when in fact they were
unclean.
because of their heart.
Mm-hmm.
Then he talked about them loading people with burdens.
Yeah.
And this was the laws that they had manufactured outside the Mosaic law.
Right, right.
That were burdensome to people. You know, you can only walk so many feet on Sabbath day. Things like this uncleanliness,
One of the-
things.
Yeah, one of the youth guys, one of the youth in our church said he believed that the number was 612
Different laws.
different laws
Yeah.
that they had manufactured through the years.
Yeah.
And of course, we know that God didn't send near that many to us, but it was 612 of them it was.
The thing about the Mosaic law is meant to it's meant for an individual to be made aware of their sin.
Mm-hmm.
It's not meant to punish them.
Right.
But when the Pharisees added these other laws, there was punishments to go along with this. They could even be rebuffed and put outside the church and outside society.
Well, there were so many of them.
Shut them out of the marketplace.
Yeah, and there were so many of them, but they pushed you away from God rather than bring you toward God.
Right.
They didn't do anything to bring you toward God. They pushed you away from God.
The people had lived long enough under this that they were tired of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You load the people with burdens, and yet you don't obey
You
them
don't pay
yourself.
attention to them.
Jesus was talking to the crowd here, and the crowd already knew this.
Yeah.
But yet the Pharisees were going around and acting like there wasn't any truth to it.
Mm-hmm.
Said you don't touch these burdens with one of your fingers. Said, you know, in other words, I can command you to do it, but you know, it's hands off for me. I can do anything I want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they took advantage of their position like that. So the attitude that says do the right thing or try harder sometimes misses the point of love and justice, because it's more about survival tactics. You think these guys were feeling, we got to survive this. We're under attack.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be easy to focus on checking boxes that are designated as good behavior and looking at others and say, you didn't check the box.
Right.
Like the Pharisee was thinking, you didn't wash your hands. So it's easy for people to do that. And frankly, our society sometimes gets wrapped up in that. Churches sometimes get wrapped up in that and start pointing fingers at other members. When that happens, we miss out on how God wants to change us from the inside by pointing out sin in our life, not to punish us, but to change your behavior and draw you closer to God. So Jesus had to rebuke them harshly to get their attention, I think, and help them understand what they were missing.
Yeah.
Now, did they ever get it? We didn't see it, did we?
Now, I have a feeling the dinner might have been cut short at that point in time.
Yeah.
They might have been said, well, it's bedtime, let's get us.
Well, in the next passages, we see that there's more people to deal
Yeah,
with.
yeah, the ruckus in the Pharisees' house might have drawn a bigger crowd out on the sidewalk, on the street. We're looking at Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 now. It says, meanwhile, back at the ranch, we'd say, meanwhile, a crowd of many thousands came together so that they were trampling on one another. He began to say to his disciples first, this is Jesus, began to say to his disciples first, be on your guard against the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. There is nothing covered that won't be uncovered, nothing hidden that won't be made known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in the ear in private rooms will be proclaimed from the rooftops. Shortly after the other incident, because it talks about meanwhile there, and it kind of draws this is a short time between the Pharisees, eating in the Pharisees' house and being outside now somewhere, and it said many thousands. And the Greek word that they use there means tens of thousands. So we've talked about Jesus a couple weeks ago about why he would have to withdraw and rest and pray. Jesus' time was not his own.
Now,
He-
JR, they didn't have Freedom Hall to walk into,
No,
or Rupp Arena. They just didn't have a place like that.
no.
So these people were stuffed in the streets and hanging out of the rooftops and the windows of the houses.
And if they were up around Capernaum, there was a pretty good bank up from the lake there, and they were sitting on that lake and waiting for Jesus to speak. I don't know if Jesus spoke from the bottom up or from the top down, but there are other verses that talk about the fact that the crowd was divided into sections, and Jesus would talk, and then his disciples, his apostles, would send it on down to the bottom, tell him what Jesus was saying. But he was talking to thousands of people, and the crowd was even trampling on one another. Now, we talked about this too a couple weeks ago. Why were they coming to see Jesus? A lot of them were coming to see Jesus because they wanted to be healed, or fed, because Jesus had done some miracles with food, feeding the people. But they also wanted to get as close to him as they can to get his attention because they had a problem. Jesus was trying to combat that, we saw earlier in his ministry, by getting away from a while, and make sure that, don't tell anybody that I healed you. But he wasn't having much luck with that, was he?
Yeah, no.
So he said to the disciples first, he's now talking to his faithful followers, not really the 12, but the followers that were probably got closest to him. He said, be on the guard against or watch or take heed against the leaven of the Pharisees. Leaven is like yeast, Phil. When you put yeast in bread, it spreads throughout the whole loaf of bread. I kind of wrote down that one bad apple spoils a whole bushel, right? You put one bad apple in a bushel, potatoes, it don't matter.
Yeah.
Apples, you're soon going to have a bushel full of rotten apples. The Pharisees were spreading untruths, and the people were listening to them because they were in positions of power, of authority, and they were corrupting so many people simply because of what was on inside their heart versus what was happening on the outside of their heart. Jesus said, watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Now, hypocrisy is eventually got to refer to an actor on stage. Phil, if you and I tried to act anything at all, it'd be terrible, but I couldn't act like a school teacher. I could act like a school teacher, but that wouldn't make me a school teacher. You could act like a doctor, but that wouldn't make you a doctor, right? You were playing a role that you weren't, and that's what he said about the Pharisees. They were playing one role, but they were actually in another role. They were being hypocritical by the way they were living their lives. And he says, "There's nothing covered that won't be uncovered, nothing hidden that won't be made known." Have we not seen that in our lifetimes, mostly with politicians and religious leaders, when they're getting by with stuff, they think they're getting by with stuff, but one day the truth will reign and expose hypocrisy. It always does. Sometimes we know it's happening and we think it's never going to be uncovered, but it always does. It always comes out. He says, everything said in the dark will be heard in the light. We've seen people who take people aside and whisper to them, and they're spreading rumors, and it's always going to be made known. He says anything whispered in the ear will be proclaimed loud. We can't we can't share stuff with other people that they shouldn't hear without them eventually telling it. Jesus indicated that sin like that is going to be exposed. Speaking and living a life that we shouldn't, a lie, as he said, the writer says, a lie will not stand the test of time nor the test of truth. We can't have one thought in our heart, in our mind, and live it different on the outside. That lie that we have, that sin we have, will eventually come out, And it was coming out in the Pharisees, the scribes, and we also know it was in the Sadducees. Numbers 32:23 says, "Be sure your sin will catch up with you. There's no amount of covering sin that can hide it from God. God knows our inner thoughts. He knows what our thoughts are. You could put lipstick on a pig, as the writer says, but it's still a pig. We've heard that all of our lives. Sin always finds a way to the surface, and Jesus used several examples with these religious leaders to show them that was the case. Their greed, their evil, all the things he said here, that they were living one way in their life, but yet their heart was something else, and it's going to be exposed. And Jesus didn't hold anything back, did he? Now, would we get by with something like this? You have to be careful. Jesus, at this point in time, Jesus it didn't make any difference to him how they felt toward him. He was more concerned about their heart than he was about how they felt toward him.
See, and I think that was the leaven that Jesus was pointing to, because the Pharisees had gotten away with it.
Yeah.
They had gotten away with it. They hadn't been called out, and people wouldn't call them out because of the power that they had and fear of reprisal, which they were known to do. And so, yeah, they had gotten away with it, or thought they had.
Thought they got away with it.
But here they get called out. Don't they? So what do we do with the study, Jay?
Yeah.
First of all, like in all these studies, check yourself.
Right.
Check our own score. Does your inside and your outside match? I mean, if your outside's ugly, you don't want the inside to be matching. But what that means is the facade that you put on in front of people, is that the same as what's in your heart? And
If you're a confessed believer, then you shouldn't have that. You're right. Exactly.
and when we look at ourselves, we need to be prepared to make the changes that are needed. Sometimes that involves getting a friend, but it always involves the first thing, confession.
Being right with God.
Confessing that sin before God. And before we call out the sins of others, we need to take care of ourselves. Lest you be in the spot there where you're pointing something out like these Pharisees were, and then getting called out about it. And that's it's the poorest witness,
Yeah.
I think. And then just practice integrity. So, well, what's integrity? It's who you are when there's nobody around. Practice having a good integrity, good character, always. Interaction with your family at home, and friends and work and church members should be the same. And it should be to the point where people look at you and say, now there goes a good Christian man.
You always say, and it's so true, you can learn more about how you act when you're by yourself than when you're in front of people. If you act by yourself the way you think God would want you to act, then that's great. Then just share that when you're with other people. But if you are acting different around yourself than you do around other people, you know something's wrong.
I'll go another step. If you're thinking bad thoughts,
Yeah.
JR, that's a sewer.
Yeah.
If you're thinking how to get back at somebody,
Yeah.
or if somebody has offended you, and you're thinking of some type of way of getting back, don't do that.
Yeah.
Pray about those things. Work on those relationships and situations that, these Pharisees, they don't show us how to do that. They don't.
Well, that's kind of
They don't react in that way, do they?
That's what Jesus was trying to tell them, wasn't he? you're wrong on the inside. Change the inside.
And like his study says, those things are gonna come to light. But if not in this world, in the next life.
Right.
So it all needs to come out and put it before God and let the healing begin. Let the healing process start. This is a great study. I'm just loving it.
Yep.
Thank you all for watching today, and hope you can be with us next week. We're gonna look at speaking truth, how important it is in our witness. Thank you for watching again.